What is a CPM schedule in construction? This is a really important topic because CPM, or the critical path method, is hurting people the way it's used today. And we're going to explain that in this video. We're going to talk about why the way CPM was designed to be is much different than the way it is used today. We're going to focus in on the really key functions that CPM is supposed to serve and really encourage everybody to not take it out of those bounds. And we're also going to list the main ways that CPM can get you in trouble if you're not careful. And so by the time you're done with this video, you will know when and where to use the critical path method in construction. Stay with us, you're going to enjoy this content. So let me go over here to my notes. The critical path method, it basically runs a forward and a backward pass, meaning that it takes a precedence diagram. So that means that in the system, you create activities that are logic tied together, and those activities that are logic tied together basically create dependencies. And then what it will do is the computer will run a forward pass and calculate then in the reverse the amount of float that each activity has based on the durations. That means that each activity can have what's called free float, which means that each one of these individual activities can be delayed and be moved back or have some slack without affecting the end date, or an activity has that project float or that total float, which means that in a sequence there's only so much float or so many days that those activities can delay without affecting the overall total project. This method presumes that you have a number of sequences in here that are based on a work breakdown structure, and when it does the forward and backward pass, it will also tell you which sequences are a part of your critical path all the way to the end. The definition of a critical path is it's the longest path where if any of these activities were delayed, it would delay the overall total project schedule. This is really problematic if it's not used in the proper way. I do want to say that the intent of this system is to identify the correct total overall project duration and to identify certain milestones based on phases. Done the right way, this system can do that effectively. And so I want to anchor you back to what this system was designed to do early on. So back in the day, and I have this from good sources, John Kaufman and Hal Makeomer. In fact, John Kaufman actually worked with the inventor of the CPM system. These were used to be very high level. So they would be very high level activities, and they would flow in a sequence. I'm not formatting it exactly right here, but they would flow in a sequence and you would be able to identify what your critical path was. A lot of this was done by hand, meaning when you calculated the algorithm forward and then you calculated it backwards, you were able to identify the amount of float that each activity had. This would sometimes take hours or days. Then with the invention of computers, they would actually plug this into a computer and it would do a forward and a backward pass overnight and calculate overnight. The activities were high level, there weren't as many of them, and they were mainly focused on phases. So that means if the computer did the forward pass, which calculated the overall duration or the longest path, and then did the backward pass, which told you how much each activity, how much flow each activity had based on that longest path, it would also identify, hey, what is your critical path, like we said before, right? So maybe your critical path goes just through here like this. It skips this activity right here, this one right here, and that's your critical path. This was effective back in the day because these represented phases, meaning when you looked at the detail here, there was a lot more to it, and that usually represented a phase or a sequence. Nowadays, with the invention of high-powered computers, these schedules have gotten so complex with so many different activities in the work breakdown structure that instead of running through phases, now we have the critical path being calculated in and throughout different sequences, which means that the critical path no longer represents something that's real. The critical path no longer runs through phases. It runs through activities that may or may not be interdependent. And so now that we have schedules that are like 76 pages we have, 1 or 2,000 activities plus. There's so much logic that human beings don't even know or understand where it all is. And the critical path is calculating based on something that really isn't real and doesn't have solid relationships. Now we're into a situation where we have a problem. And I'm going to explain that now. So first and foremost, if you're using the critical path method, here are some things that I want you to watch out for. First and foremost, if you have a schedule and your schedule has a critical path and your end date is based on that longest path, that means that you might not have any float or any slack, or intact, it's what we call buffers. So that means if you have a delay in here, that means you'll either go behind schedule or you'll start to dissolve logic. So if you have an activity and another activity, and this is what's called a finish to start relationship, what you'll start to do, or the scheduler or the superintendent, is you'll start to dissolve that logic, or you'll put like a lag in there, which means that you're starting to stack activities. Well, the problem with this is if these are trades and they're moving from area to area, they were going from this area to that area, they can't magically do the twice as much work out of nowhere, right? So stacking is a major problem. And so what you'll start to see is your schedule will start to look very much stacked here at the end. Okay, and instead of your trades flowing in a nice diagonal, they'll be much more vertical. And the problem is it's not real. Okay, and we have other videos to accentuate this. So your critical path might come down through here, right, and say, okay, we're good, and we have 0 days of project float, total float. Okay, and you could think to yourself, oh wow, I'm on schedule, but because these activities are stacked, they're really not going to do this steep incline. They're really going to do this, and they really need that extra time. So your schedule could be 3, 4, 5, 6 months behind schedule, and you not even know it. So here's what I'm going to tell you. If you're going to be looking at a critical path, you also have to make sure that your trades are flowing, meaning you can't have this stacking. So you're going to have to, in your schedule, filter out with activity codes, depending on what software you're using, filter out and make sure that your trades have a good flow. And that's why Tact is so much better. It automatically visualizes that for you. So real quick, before I give you the rest of the topics that I want to talk about, please like and subscribe on this channel. We cover a lot of these topics which will really expand your mindset when it comes to managing construction projects. Remember, this is a labor of love here for you. Please like and subscribe. We want this to benefit you throughout your career. Okay, so let's get back to this. There's something else that I want to talk to you about with this specifically. If you have a project schedule that is detailed all the way to the end, and let's just say there's another phase over here, and your critical path runs through these and down here to the end, but it does not run through this. If the owner or a vendor or a trade or a designer delays one of these activities, based on the contract language, they can say, I do not owe you any more money or any more time because that's not on the critical path. But although we can't see it most of the time in this type of a schedule, this delay could create a chain reaction that will delay your overall project. So you must be careful of that. The other thing I want you to be careful of is that if you have a longest path on your project and you don't have float here at the end, meaning contingency built into the schedule, you're in trouble, because you know that there's going to be points along this sequence where there's going to be delays, interruptions, roadblocks. And if you do not have some float at the end of the schedule, you're going to start condensing these activities and stacking them vertically, which is going to hurt workers and make workers pay for the sins of a failed project. So if you're going to use CPM, I am asking you to do these things. I want you to keep your schedule at a high level like it was designed to be, meaning you're looking at a level 1 or a level 2 schedule according to CPM standards. The other thing is, I never want you to build a schedule without float. I want you to have float, and I want you to have float at the end of the schedule so that you're never stuck where you need to trade stack and condense the end of the schedules. Okay? The other thing is, I want you to be mindful of your contract and not get into unhealthy situations where you don't get time extensions because it's not on the critical path. The last thing that I want you to do is, if you're going to use CPM, you must understand at all times that you have trade flow, meaning that you don't have trade stacking, because if you do have trade stacking, your critical path doesn't mean anything. It's not real. But if you do have good flow, meaning a contractor can go from area to area to area to area in a nice diagonal flow, and you're monitoring a critical path, that'll work just fine for me. I do think it's easier in TACT and in a TACT format, but I'm fine as long as you follow these 4 rules. And so why am I telling you this? Because when we condense the end of schedules, we start hurting people. And we have got to stop treating our people like this. We need to protect our workers, we need to train and protect our leadership, and we need to keep people's families safe at home. And we only do that when we have a remarkable plan that can deliver remarkable results for our people. And so the call to action on this in the description below is a link to a book called Tact Planning and Integrated Control. Regardless of whether you're using CPM or TACT, this book has so much scheduling basics, so much scheduling theory that you need in order to be really on top of it from a construction management standpoint and really build remarkable schedules. It will explain these same concepts, it will warn you about the possible pitfalls, and enable you to elevate production on your job site. On we go.